Hello, and welcome to Midwest Sustainability Advocacy 101 seminars. Today, we are going to be talking with Jackie Kendall, who is an amazing organizer and a teacher of organizers in her own right. She is a personal friend of mine, and we can think of no better person than to teach Advocacy 101, organizing when being right is not enough. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jackie, and I'm going to let her tell a little bit about herself. She's a personal friend of mine and a neighbor. I met her as a friend and a neighbor before I knew her background. I think the way I found out was a friend of mine who's an organizer, Christine Nanicelli, the best organizer I've ever met. And I said, I want to learn more about organizing. How can I do that? And she said, well, two things. One, go to the Midwest Academy and do the training for organizers, which I did and highly recommend. And the second was, she said, get this book, Organizing for Social Change. And I bought it, and I said, it was written by 3 authors. And I said, Jackie Kendall, I know somebody with that name. Anyway, long story short, that's how I found out about Jackie's phenomenal background. So Jackie, tell us a little bit about your background as an organizer and an organizing teacher and how you got started.
Okay, so thank you. This is a pleasure to do this, all in 20 minutes. So, yeah, I did not start out to be an organizer. I didn't even know what an organizer was. Okay, I was just I had moved from New York to Chicago in 1968. We had 3 children, soon to have a 4th. I was a stay-at-home mom, and one day, she wasn't even a friend then. It was just somebody who I'd met. Was talking to me about how old food is, and you can't tell because it's all coated. Now, what do you mean? She starts literally rummaging through my refrigerator, pulling stuff out. She goes, "Oh my God, look at this! This is like 2 months beyond the end of shelf life. You shouldn't be eating this." What is she talking about? So sure enough, all of the food had codes on it. Not something like, 22721 is today, okay, February 22nd, but things like QWMR 47 whatever. I mean, totally undecipherable numbers. Not just anyway. I could go on that topic forever, but suffice it to say that she ended up recruiting me. We started. We had no idea what we were doing. Let me just start with that. We had no idea what we thought.
That's how a lot of us start.
Yes, yeah, right. So we'll just go to the supermarket and we'll talk to them and like we started asking how old is this produce? How old is this meat? Well, you would think we were about to start World War III. I mean, we were met with such. It's hard to exaggerate how crazy the supermarkets went. I mean, to the point where when we would walk in, a bell would go off we didn't even know what it was, but a bell would go off. It was just signal to the people in the store, the crazy ladies are here to look at dates. And so we started checking out the dates. We started, some of them were fairly easy to decipher, like if it was something like like today's date, but most of them weren't. But we started playing around with them. We'd write to manufacturers and ask them. I remember once we wrote to, I probably should remember because I can't remember. I won't say the company because I'm not sure if I'm correct, but it was a big cereal company, okay? And we wrote to them asking them to translate the code on their cereal boxes. And instead we got this huge carton full of cereal to say, basically, try it, you'll like it.
And shut up.
Exactly. And so that went on for a while. And so at that point, I guess you could say, if we had to go back and construct it on how you could do a campaign, we were basically in an educational phase. People didn't know, including us, at that point, we didn't even know that the food was coded. Other people didn't know. So we would go out and speak at different groups. And when I say we, I'm talking about 5 housewives, okay, 5 moms. And we would get invited to people's homes, to libraries. We'd go anywhere. and telling them all about this and urging them to, go to your supermarket and ask for dates. Well, that went on for quite a while, and nothing happened. And then finally, we decided to draw publicity, draw attention to it. So we would go. Oh my gosh, some of the things were pretty crazy. Well, I mean, one day we stood outside a supermarket, and if you remember the old show, Supermarket Sweepstakes, where people would run around. Well, we were doing supermarket sweepstakes. So we're out there with the microphone, again saying, step right up, and we'd hand them a list of codes that were translated, and said, go into the store. Person who gets the most outdated food in 5 minute wins. Well, people were coming up, and I guess they thought this was like a normal thing to do. I don't know. They all started grabbing shopping carts, running through the store, filling them up with outdated food. The TV cameras were there. We had enough sense to say, we have to publicize. And so every time we would do something, we'd let the press and TV stations and whatnot, and they started covering us. And so this is on television, and we just come up with all kinds of crazy gimmicks in a way. Very often the police were called, like that day for sure they were called. The police would come and we'd go, fine, we'll leave. But meanwhile, we'd gotten across what we wanted done, okay? And it went on. Anyway, that went on for a number of years. We ended up eventually getting a number of manufacturers to put, you can see it today when you walk in the supermarket. There's dates on all kinds of things. We got municipalities, a number of municipalities to pass legislation requiring dates. We never did get federal legislation. We didn't really understand about power at the time. We just thought as long as we could tell people, look, here's what's wrong, here's what would make it right, do it, that anyway, like they weren't doing the codes intentionally to be able to sell outdated food. And I don't mean just like a couple of weeks. The absolute worst thing we found was a can of infant formula. Now, if that's what babies are taking, it's usually the only thing they're getting, nutrition that they're getting. 2 years beyond the end of shelf life. I mean,
was it even nutritious at that point? I mean,
was it what?
Was it even nutritious at that point?
Well, that's exactly the point. We had a pediatric nutritionist test it, and they said it wasn't poison, it wasn't going to kill, but there was absolutely no nutritional value left in it. And there it was sitting on a shelf in a suburban supermarket. Nobody knew how to tell. So that was a very big learning experience. And in the course of that, I ran into people like Bob Creamer and Heather Booth and Paul Booth, who had all been involved with Zelensky and the CAP, the Crosstown Expressway fight in Chicago. And Heather had started the Midwest Academy, and they kept saying, oh, you got to go to the Midwest Academy. It was a big commitment. I mean, when you went, right? You had to leave Bella at home. I mean, it's like, and at that point, when I went, it was 2 weeks. So it meant finding somebody to babysit for 2 weeks and whatnot. But I did it. And it was, I always say, it was like the V8 moment in my life. It's like, oh my God. Every day, just things were popping. And I guess the most important takeaways from it were, one, you don't win by being right. That was like the biggie, okay? I had to learn how to think strategically and organizationally, understand the difference between being an advocate, we were consumer advocates, and organizing for power in order to win, okay? And then building organizations in the process that were strong and powerful enough that they could not only win the victories, but maintain them over time, because it's never over. As soon as you win, the other side is back 2 seconds later and trying to undo it. And these things take time. They take a lot of time. Right now, we mentioned the Midwest Academy. So when I went there, that was 1974, and it was, I mean, it literally changed my life. And in the, I think around 1981, I ended up becoming the director and stayed there until, I was the director until 2010 when I retired the first time. So I've been working with Food and Water Watch, a national environmental organization, for the last 5 years. Actually, I worked with them since they began, 17, 18 years ago, because they sent all of their organizers to the Midwest Academy. But I literally on their staff half-time for the last couple of years. And it just, especially on environmental issues, it takes a long time, okay? The opposing powers are very strong, and they have lots of money, and they'll fight, beat you down. So, for instance, the fight to ban fracking in New York, and then later, a few years later, in Maryland, both of those fights took 7 years. And it was Food and Water Watch and a number of other groups. Just this week, the governors of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware voted to ban fracking in the Delaware River Basin. Huge victory. A 10-year battle. I mean, with, large national organizations, including Food and Water Watch, and lots of little, smaller local organizations, but a huge battle. And it's not like those 4 governors woke up last week and said, why don't we ban fracking in the Delaware River Basin?
Yeah. Well, look at Route 53, 60 years. It's been beaten 4 times. It took us 4 years this last time to stop it, but it's been 4 battles over a 60-year period. Yeah.
And back in the 70s, when I went, like 1975, I went to work at what was then Illinois Public Action Council. And that was one of the first campaigns I was involved in. I was living in Palatine. We were fighting down, that part of the expressway. But yeah, it took, I mean, it's just amazing. And anyway, so.
Well, you told me once that you had some legislation, because I think this is such a good illustration of when being right is not enough. And you said you had some legislation, I think it was in the Illinois General Assembly, on the food dates. But there was someone that came in the room. Do you want to tell that story? Because that was kind of a light bulb illustration to me of why sometimes being right is not enough.
Yeah, so we're in a committee hearing, and, oh God, Eugenia Chapman, no longer with us, but a wonderful, wonderful woman and legislator. She was the sponsor of a bill. She was from Arlington Heights. And she, so I went down to testify, and she and I walk into the committee room, the committee hearing, and it's all men, all men around a big table, and Eugenia and I start talking, okay? As she introduced me, they asked me a question, I start talking. The first reaction was, oh, Mrs. Chapman, this can't be a problem in Illinois if you have to go all the way to New York to get a witness. So so I got a New York accent. Big deal. So they're just they're just mocking, and they think they're going to throw you off by that kind of stuff. So anyway, I start going through it. I literally brought in 2 bags of outdated grocery food that I bought in the supermarket nearest the Capitol. And I plopped them down on the table in the hearing room, and they're all looking at me like I'm crazy. And I just I just took them out and started passing them around. I said, so tell me how old the food is. And they're looking at it, and nobody can tell. And so I went around and translated the codes. They were all outdated. They're horrified. And I said, if you're living down here during the session and buying stuff at the local grocery store, you very well could be eating outdated food. It didn't matter. Went through all kinds of numbers. They're just sitting there. They're not, they're actually nodding along like they agree with me. And I'm, the voice in my head is going, you got this. You're going to win. This is exciting. And comes time for the vote. Goes around the room, and it's a tie. And the chair of the committee looks at me and says, Mrs. Kendall, he said, I am really sorry. He said, I agree with you 100%. You are right. But I have to vote against this because I made a deal. A deal? With whom? Where's the cigar smoke and the who knows? Anyway, so it didn't matter that I was right. It didn't matter that he agreed with me that I was right. He was voting against it because he made a deal. And it turns out the lobbyist for the company he was, or whoever was making the deal with, was sitting off to the side watching everything. But that was such a lesson that there I was, one person, all alone in that hearing room, thinking I was so smart and just going to lay out all the facts and wow them, and they'd say, so glad you came, we'll vote yes. Not the case. I had no power in that room. My own state legislator wasn't even there. I did not have one vote. And that was the moment that I knew I had to go out and organize. I was a consumer advocate. I was there speaking on behalf of consumers who had no idea I was there. They didn't pay me. They didn't elect me. I was one person. And that was when I knew I had to go back and figure out how to organize to have enough power to make it politically dangerous for these guys to vote no, especially when they knew I was right. So
it's about power building. Well, and we're going to do a follow-up webinar and some follow-up videos about some of the individual components of organizing, because there's a lot to it. When we give our 53 presentation about how we beat it, we were shocked when we looked back at all the things and all the work and all the different components that went into it. But what I'd like to talk about today is kind of an overview of organizing. What is it? What does an organizer do, for example? Is there a difference between grassroots organizing as a volunteer group and a professional organizer and the kind of work they do? Can you talk a little bit about what organizing is?
Okay, so organizing is building a base of people who have enough power to get those in power to do what they want. That's basically that's as simple as I can make it. And the difference between that and advocacy is you can do a lot of things and be successful being an advocate. But when you out there advocating for a position and suddenly there's well-funded, very powerful opposition, then it's not enough to just be an advocate with the facts and figures and whatnot. Then you have to really build a power base. I view it as, the lobbyists for industry are walking into that room with a suitcase full of money, campaign contributions and whatever. And we have to be walking in with a suitcase full of votes, enough votes to outweigh the money that the other side is going to use. So we have to organize the people. So the organizers organize people who are directly affected by an issue to come up with a solution and work to win, work to pass it. Whether that's at a school board or a city council or a county board, state legislature or the U.S. Congress, it's the same process. It's just, usually more targets, okay? And so, for instance, if we were working on an issue where the place where it was decided is the U.S. Congress, and we were the only people working for it, like right here in our district, okay? If we were the only ones working on it, and we got our congressmen to vote yes for it, unless that's happening in a sufficient number of other, I'm not telling you anything on this, but unless it's happening in enough other congressional districts, it's not going to pass. He can go in there and be the good guy and vote for it, but it's not going to pass. Right. And so, we've got to understand where the decision is being made. I mean, that's critical. Is this something that's being made at the city council or the state legislature? And if so, who do we have to organize? And and who are the targets that we have to go after? And by targets, I don't mean the bad guy or the enemy. I just mean the targets are the decision makers. So
the person who can give you what you want is the target, right?
The person who can give you what you want says yes or no, and it's always a person. So if you say the school board, then the question is how many people are on the school board. So let's say it's seven people on the school board. Are they elected or appointed? Okay, big difference. If they're elected, we have some power over them. Are they elected by district, right, or at large? If they're elected by district, we can organize by district. If there's 7, we need 4 votes, okay? So you go and you talk to them, and let's say you find out that, 3 or 4 are what you want, 2 are opposed to it, and 2 are undecided. Then we've got to go, if the people who are opposed are so opposed that they're never going to be with you, and you think you can get the 2 undecideds, then go with the 2 undecideds and don't worry about the other ones. We don't have enough resources to go after everyone. But it's math. You got to do the math, okay? And add it all up.
Figure out what you want. Figure out who can give it to you. Excuse me, and figure out how you're going to get them, or persuade the ones that are not necessarily on your side. Yeah,
right. And so that's developing a strategy, and only then do you move to the tactics. And that was the thing that I also learned at the Midwest Academy, because back when I was doing the food stuff, oh my gosh, we were the queen of tactics, right? I mean, we would come up with these great gimmicks and get all kinds of press, but we weren't really putting direct pressure on the people who were making the decision to force them to do it, okay? We were basically talking to the world, but not focusing our attention or our power on those making the decision. And so it's only when you figure out that strategy, then you decide what are the tactics that are going to move that person and who'll do them. Sometimes you can come up with wild tactics, but nobody will do them.
We've had ringers. We've had ringers in meetings before that we send in to hassle them and say, "Oh, that's ridiculous." Like somebody in the back of the room that we planted there. We've done stuff like that too. That doesn't pass the laugh test, or whatever. And we could be the good guys in the meeting. We're the reasonable ones. Now that's a great segue into the Midwest Academy. Before we break up here for the end of the video. Midwest Academy and your book, Organizing for Social Change. Those are 2 great tools. You got the book there. Yes. That to me, that's like my Bible. Because if people want to learn how to develop a strategy and the whole process you need to go through, I mean, obviously the Midwest Academy training is going to give it so much more in depth. I think they're week long. I think I spent a week when I did it. And there are follow-up trainings you can do. But the book explains each part that goes into a strategy, how to develop a strategy. You want to talk about it a little bit? You're one of the authors.
No, it's great. The book I held up is the last edition, the 4th edition. That was published in 2010, just before I retired. It needs an update. So, all the stuff that happened in the last 10 years, and there's been so much, is actually not in there. But the fundamentals, the building power, the figuring out the strategy, that all still is in there and works. Okay. Yeah. Some of the examples may seem a little outdated, but you can use your imagination, come up with new examples.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it has the nuts and bolts, though. It has, what you need to know, for sure.
Yes, yeah. And if you go to the MidwestAcademy.com, not all, MidwestAcademy.com, you can click on there and see how to buy the book or get the training.
I think I got mine on Barnes and Noble or something. I think Amazon has it too. Yeah. And then Midwest Academy trainings also travel around. I don't know if they still are during the pandemic, but you don't have to be in Chicago to do the training.
No, we've done them all over the country. In fact, around internationally, we've done them in lots of different countries. But because of COVID, we had to figure out how to put it all online, and so it's they're being done online now, something we never would have thought possible a few years ago, but there it is. So I'm no longer doing the training. Periodically, when there's short, when there's too much going on, I'll come in and do it. But I'm on the board, and the new directors and staff were all great, and the training continues. It's wonderful.
Yes, and I highly, highly recommend that. So thank you so much for your time today, Jackie. We're going to have follow-up visits about some of the components like power mapping and determining targets and things like that in follow-up sessions. But we wanted to give a good overview of what organizing is today to explain it to people that maybe didn't know. So we really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye, Jackie. Thank you so much for joining us today. You can subscribe to our stream today, and if you click the little bell, you'll be notified. You can also go to MidwestSustainability.org and sign up for our newsletter. We always promote our new posts, our new videos, and our new live streaming webinars through our newsletter. So that's a good way to stay in touch. And please, if you like this information, give us a like. Thank you, and good luck creating positive social change.